Hey, thanks Joel and Sheridan for leading us so well this morning to the team. Down a couple of soldiers, as you heard this morning, did a fabulous job there. Thanks to you for being here as well. And if something in all that did speak to you and you would like to share that with someone afterwards, then we'd love to journey with you. So come and find Joel, myself, someone that you've seen on stage otherwise, and take time to share the journey. Just a couple of welcomes this morning. My name's DJ, by the way, if we've not met. Just wanted to welcome a few people this morning. We've got Abby and Sam here this morning. Welcome, guys. If you've not met them, that's okay, but could you put your hands together for them all the same? Make them feel welcome. Chantel is visiting with us as well. I haven't got my glasses on, so I'm struggling. Down the back there, welcome Chantel here with Yvonne and Jean this morning. And Annie, welcome back from Melbourne. So good to have you with us. Who else is here that's not always here? Either you're visiting or you're new or something like that. If you're brave enough to put up your hand, I know it takes enough courage even just to walk through the doors sometimes, but would you just give us a little wave so we can see who else is either visiting from being away or afar? Okay, wonderful. Well, if that's you, then thank you so much for being here. It's our privilege and honour to have you in our midst this morning. Hey, haven't got Hillary here this morning with her packet of tissues. I should have learnt from last week. Oh, Kate's got some. Good on you, Kate. Oh, all right, throw it. There we go. Oh, good throw. Fantastic. Thank you. All of us are. We just may not know it because it's sitting embedded in more and more of what we do these days, isn't it? But as it becomes more and more part of our world and our reality, our workplace, I just felt like it was appropriate to footnote my sermon this morning. I'm using it more and more too, and I'm not going to tell you this every week, right? Start with a footnote. But I feel like at this point in time, I should say that some of today and going forward, you could probably assume that some of the research and preparation that I do for my sermons at least, can't speak for everyone on the team, but my sermons at least, I'm drawing on AI. I think it's just good practice to acknowledge that, where that's the case. Now, that doesn't mean I'm getting them right in my whole sermons for me. They'd probably be better if I did. But they still need fact-checking. So I'm using this app a bit more called Perplexity. Anyone come across Perplexity? It's just another of these. It's a bit like Google for the AI age. You can kind of search anything, but it gives you better answers. It doesn't give you all the sponsored links. But the thing I like about Perplexity over ChatGPT or Claude or any of those is that it references its sources. So it actually makes it easier to fact-check what the sources of the information are that it gives back to you when you ask it to do certain tasks. But I do promise that I am still fact-checking. I could get another app to fact-check the other app, perhaps, but there is a human still involved, that's me. But there are some other sources that I wanted to acknowledge this morning as well. This whole series that we're in the middle of at the moment, called Ordinary Acts, 5 Simple Practices for Living Out the Good News with Others, we're drawing heavily on a book by Dave and John Ferguson, they're pastors in the US, by this name, Bless. They call it 5 Everyday Ways to Love Your Neighbour and Change the World. And that's actually been really helpful, instrumental in setting up this series. They use this BLESS acronym or acrostic in the book, and we just found that was so helpful. But we also found that this fitted really well with the ethos of us here at New Vine Church, that it reflected a kind of way our witness to Jesus in the world around us. That we thought, well, why reinvent the wheel? Why not take this really good thinking that we found elsewhere? But we want to acknowledge that we're doing that, and I'll be drawing on some of their work this morning. And another source that I'm drawing on this morning is this book called The Missional Entrepreneur by Mark Russell. Now, this is a publication of Russell's PhD research, some of which he undertook in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Who's been to Chiang Mai? Yeah, okay, in the north of Thailand. Great. Anybody lived in Chiang Mai? Well, Mark Russell it was at Asbury Theological Seminary in the US. He did this research in Chiang Mai, Thailand, where he studied different missional strategies and approaches so that he could understand why some were much more successful than others. And he noticed among the sort of mission community in Chiang Mai, Thailand, that there were there were, broadly speaking, two categories of approaches among the missionaries there. What he came to call the blessers and the converters. Now, the names probably kind of give you a sense of the kind of missional approach. Conversions. Any acts of service or any social activities, any social good, if you like, were just a means to an end. Their real goal of this group was saving souls, we might say, to put it in kind of old school. And then there was the blessers. And this group led with a sincere concern for the people that they were working with, a driving motivation to bless the Thai people in practical ways. They were still there on mission, but they had a kind of different starting point or a different attitude in how they went about it. Well, which approach do you think had more success? Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, in terms of social impact, which do you think had more success? The blessers. Well, that stands to reason, doesn't it? What about in terms of seeing people actually become followers of Jesus, though? Do you think the blessers were as successful as those who went with a single kind of focus really on? Okay. Fascinating, isn't it? But here's the thing. Over more than 100 interviews, hours spent analysing the data, what he found was that the groups who... Whoa, there it goes. That's how it worked for you. There we go. That the success rate of seeing people become followers of Jesus was 48 times greater from those groups, organisations and individuals who went with an attitude to bless in the first instance. Isn't that interesting? Now, this is one study in one community in one part of the world. So the danger is always to generalise from research and say this is universal and be the same everywhere. But that is interesting. And maybe there is something that we can see in this. Nearly 50 times as many people were drawn to Jesus by those who set out to live out the good news, by loving and serving and blessing the people they worked with. And when you think about it, it kind of stands to reason, doesn't it? Because no one wants to be converted, but everyone wants to be blessed. They might not use that language, but everyone wants to experience a good in their life that improves their life. Everyone wants to feel loved and have their life and living circumstances improved. And that's really the heart of this series. It's the message of this series. Because our mission here at New Vine, to reach out to our community, our neighbours and our friends and our colleagues at work, school, wherever, it doesn't have to be front-loaded with words. It doesn't need to be preachy. And I reckon props to whomever that was who felt last week that God was moving them just to talk to that person at the bus stop, like props to that person. That is brilliant. And I wish you all of us had the courage, myself included, to follow those nudges when we have them. But here at New Vine, we absolutely, hand on heart, believe that we have amazing news to share. And we also believe, at the same time, that the gospel is a message to be preached. It's also a message to be lived. It's not just information to download. It's actually an invitation to upgrade our entire operating system. And we best demonstrate that sometimes, not with words, but by being living examples of the operating system upgrade that happens when you start to follow Jesus and have His Spirit at work in your life. It's a process that isn't fully worked out in our mortal lives, right? But it's underway. In fact, I want to suggest that when we bless others through our lives, not just our words, that's when the good news becomes irresistible. In a world of noise, people will tune out words, but tune into authentic, loving lives. I think that goes almost without saying. I'm not saying there's not a time for words. And if God puts it on your heart that now's a moment to share, well, be like whoever that was amongst us that did that. Because that might be the moment that he does speak powerfully. But I think it's also good news for the rest of us that being gospel people is something that we live out, not just speak out. Because if you're a follower of Jesus, then like me, you've probably been there. You really believe the gospel is good news, but you still kind of find it awkward to talk about your faith when it feels like you're trying to force something on people, something that they're not wanting to buy. And maybe you've been on the other side of it. You've had someone try to convert you to something or sell you something you didn't want. And you feel your defenses go up, right? I've certainly been in those situations. In fact, there was a time a few years ago, I won't mention where or what or anything, but Louise and I were getting help with a certain aspect of life, shall we say, being a bit vague, I know here. And this person, a professional, in the course of doing their duties, they heard that I worked in academia as a theologian. And for whatever reason, they decided that I needed to be converted to their way of seeing the world or their way of thinking. And I remember afterwards, and you know, the conversation then was kind of full of not just the task that we were on, but this. And I remember it so well because afterwards we left their office and we went into a supermarket or something nearby. And a minute or two later, they come running down the aisle with a tract. And they gave it to us and said, you've got to read this. This tells you what we all should be believing is. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I was a senior lecturer in theology, but they needed to. Anyway. God bless them. Maybe they felt God nudging. Maybe I did need to hear it. Anyway. But you know what it's like, don't you? When your defenses go up. But when you see someone living authentically, and when you see that there's something different, hope that they have amidst the suffering that they're going through. Just a sense of conviction that things will be okay. The knowledge that they demonstrate that there is a greater power who cares and loves for them and has their hand upon them. Whatever it might be, when we live it out, it becomes more authentic. So what if there is a better way? A simpler way that feels more natural and authentic. A way that isn't just another evangelism program, but a way of life. Not cheesy Christian tactics, but timeless practices from the life of Jesus that builds bridges and not barriers. And if you are visiting with us today and church is not usually your jam, then I hope you can hear our heart here as a church. A heart to bless you and your family and your household. And that through that, you might see that the story of Jesus is real. And it's amazing. And it's good news. And that it's an invitation for you too, to find what you've been looking for. So, to quickly recap, in week 1 of our series, Joel, our Director of Community Care, outlined the good news about Jesus for us afresh, and also this bless framework. And he challenged us to think about 2 or 3 people in our world. And then last week, Matt Madigan gave a great message on prayer. If you missed it, go back and watch it. Great message on reframing how we think about prayer to help us get rid of, for those of us who are praying people, to help us get rid of some of the guilt that builds up around prayer, that we should be doing it more and more often and better and so on. And to embrace prayer as this wonderful opportunity and invitation that it is for us in our lives. And so my first follow-up challenge today is this. How can you bring those 2 ideas together? By beginning to pray for the 1 or 2 people in your life that you identified as needing to know the wonderful news about Jesus. Neighbours, friends, family, people that you'd like to see blessed in that way. Now, if you can't think of 2 or 3, well, even 1 will do. Who's that one? That one person. And then start to bless them with prayer. Because prayer itself is a blessing. To pray for someone is to bless them in a powerful spiritual way. And the wonderful thing, the thing I love about this idea, the thing I love about praying for other people is it's kind of like a secret blessing. Sometimes there's a time to tell someone that you're praying for them. That can be an encouragement in itself and a good thing to do. And I've been blown away at times when people have told me that they've been praying for me. I'm thinking, really? Wow, that is so awesome. I didn't know, and I didn't know I needed it, but thank you. But even more so when we pray for people and they don't know it, we're blessing their life in a quiet way that isn't seeking kudos or credibility or a pat on the back. It itself is a blessing. So let me challenge us all today to be praying for at least one person in our neighbourhood, maybe the people next door or across the fence or across the street or a friend or a colleague or someone at school. But don't just pray for them once. The idea of this framework is to take on a commitment to pray for them regularly. Don't feel guilty about it when you forget, but when you feel prompted, feel it as an invitation to bless them in secret. Well, that's the B. So today we're going to actually focus on the L and the E. And here's, there they are. And these two so often go together. And that brings us to this passage in the book of Luke, which, if you're new to church, is one of 4 biographies of Jesus found in the New Testament section of the Bible, which was written soon afterwards by someone who carefully investigated the stories about Jesus and the compelling and remarkable things that he said and did. And here's one episode from one of those stories, and Zach's going to come and share it with us now. Thanks, Zach.
So this is Luke chapter 18, verses 35 to 42. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. He called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you.
Thank you. Let's see what's going on here. There's a crowd, if you've been to Sydney Olympic Park and maybe to, is it Kudos Arena or the stadium, and the crowds are all kind of going through the turnstiles or security or whatever, and there's lots of people. You can kind of, if you've ever done that or something like it, you can imagine kind of some of the clamour that's going on. There's this crowd gathered around Jesus, obviously. And it's making noise, but over the top of it, he hears this one voice. And interestingly, the reaction of those around Jesus is to tell this person to quieten down. Stop talking. No one wants to listen to this blind beggar. But Jesus is different. Jesus hears and he stops and he asks them to bring this man to him, whoever it is that's crying out. We don't know why. The text really doesn't tell us how it is that Jesus hears this man over the others or why he stops and picks out this particular individual. But we do know what happens next, something really curious. Jesus can see that this man is a beggar, which unfortunately was not unusual in Jesus' day, and even to this day in many parts of the world is not unusual. There was no NDIS, no disability pension, no government support at all for the unemployed and the disabled. And so millions of people across the Roman Empire at this time are reduced to begging. Some of them former soldiers from the Roman army, others who suffered disability in some way. And presumably Jesus, who can see that this man can't see. And Jesus therefore could guess at ways that he might be able to help. So you come across a blind beggar. You're kind of going to guess at some ways that seem pretty obvious that you might be able to help. Jesus also presumably knows that this guy has spiritual needs as well as physical needs. Jesus seems to have this knack of being able to identify the deeper spiritual needs. Woman at the well, woman caught in adultery, Nicodemus, rich young ruler. Despite all of that, Jesus doesn't jump to conclusions. He doesn't preach to this guy. He doesn't launch into some bridge to life explanation of our sin and need of forgiveness and so on. He doesn't presume to know what this man needs. Instead, he stops. He asks a question and he listens to the answer. He lets the other person in the encounter speak for themselves and identify their own needs. He says, what do you want me to do for you? Lord, I want to see, he replied. And then Jesus blesses him with this miracle of healing, restoring his sight. Well, let's be honest, our world is pretty different from the one Jesus lived in 2,000 years ago. The culture's shifted, technology's advanced. But one thing that hasn't changed is we still have a massive listening deficit. We still have people in the crowds telling others to shut up. Don't want to hear you, be quiet, or just simply tuned out. And even us are like that much of the time, aren't we? So fast forward to 2024 and it seems today that everyone has got something to say and too few take time to listen. And I know I struggle with this. I'm prone to place way too much value, just ask my team or my family, too much value on my own perspectives and opinions. Actually, there was this time, this is not in my notes, there was a time I worked in another setting, large organisation, and I had a senior role. I remember sitting down with the CEO. I'd worked there for several years under this CEO, and I sat down with him one day for our regular catch-up. And I said to him, look, I know there's some areas I need to improve. I know there's things I need to grow in. Is there a piece of advice that you can give me? And he said, got this very wise, sagely look on his face, and he was very wise. And he said, you don't need to have an opinion on everything. Obviously, I'm still learning that, prone to fall back into it. But it's so easy to talk these days, isn't it? To broadcast our life. And I learned a lesson about this years ago when I worked in radio. Still, obviously, a work in progress. Now, it may seem strange. I've worked in radio for a couple of years as an announcer, and it may seem strange because for a radio announcer, radio is kind of a one-way medium. You sit behind a microphone, something like that, and you talk, and you play songs and read the ads, and et cetera, et cetera. And all of that suited me just fine. Lots of talking, which I like doing. Not much listening to other people, which I also like doing. Suited me to a T, right? Well, I soon discovered that actually radio is not a one-way medium. Radio is very much a two-way medium because people don't just want to listen. They need to be listened to. So I'd get phone calls, people ringing up to make a request or a love song dedication. I never said that. Maybe I should have. So I'd get these phone calls, people would ring up, and soon they're telling you their whole life story. They've heard you speak enough to feel like they know you a little bit on radio. It's this funny thing. And there was this one lady who used to ring, an elderly lady. And after I'd been on air a couple of months, she'd ring me at 9:05 every night. I did 6 till midnight, right? She'd ring me 9:05 every night just after the 9 o'clock news had finished. And often she was still on the phone at 5 past midnight when I was shutting the whole station down. In fact, sometimes she talked so much that I'd had to back announce a song or go to the bathroom, and I couldn't get a word in edgeways to let her know. So sometimes I literally had to hit the mute button on the phone, do the back announcing, whatever I had to do, read the weather, visit the bathroom. I would come back and she'd still be talking. She didn't even realise I'd left the conversation. Have you ever known someone like that, right? She was lonely. She didn't just need someone to talk at her. She needed someone to listen to her. She died a couple of years later, and I was the one who felt like I'd lost a friend. She taught me to listen. She taught me the need that people have to listen to them. We have a world that's hungry to be heard, one voice at a time, that doesn't say, shut up, shut up. It says, tell me about that. What's going on for you? How can we listen better? Well, I find myself in my notes here. When it comes to the gospel, the greatest sermon that you'll ever preach might be the one you never say a word in, because you were too busy listening. When you listen to someone, the following kind of things happen. When you listen, when you really listen, you affirm the value of someone's words, their life, and their existence. It can be as profound as that. You help to tune into their needs, like the blind beggar at Jericho gate. Jesus stopped to listen and tune in to their needs. And that in turn helps you better discern the more essential issues, the things below the chit-chat. Over time, asking the right questions, listening, can tease out what the deeper hurts and joys and aspirations and needs are in someone's life. Like the spiritual poverty of the rich young man who kept all the rules but was enslaved to an idol, his money. And when we listen, we're also better able to contextualize for different audiences. Jesus seems to have been really good at contextualizing how he responded in ways that made sense to different people. Tax collectors, very different to Pharisees, very different again to his closest disciples, to the woman that he met at the well on the way through Samaria. By listening, we're able to speak a word when that moment comes, in season and appropriate in that moment. What's more, we build relationships, of course, by listening, not just by talking. It has to be two-way. But you'll never build a relationship with someone that you only ever talk at. At least it won't be a real, mutual, genuine relationship. And in an opinionated world, you'll help do your part to create more empathy, more compassion, more understanding, and open the door to share your own story too, and how that story intersects with the wonderful story of Jesus. So, some quick application questions here. How good are you at listening? No guilt, but something to reflect on. What are the biggest barriers that you struggle with to listening well? And who around you needs you to stop talking and to listen attentively, carefully, to really hear them and understand them? I can hear a few few sniggers. Couples maybe giving each other the knowing look. Well, how can you start listening to someone this week? How can we all, me included? Well, that's the B and the L. That brings us to the E. This is the good part, right? Like Joel, I love to eat. Love to talk, but also love to eat. So a pop quiz. This is a warm-up for the trivia night that we're holding later in the year. Did I tell you we're holding a trivia night later in the year? I just did. I haven't told the staff that either yet, so if you could just don't tell them yet. I want to break the news to them myself. We're holding a trivia night later in the year. And this is a warm-up. Which famous actor is known for constantly eating, if you know the answer to this, because I've told you this story, keep it to yourself, constantly eating in their movies? Brad Pitt. Let's see if that's the answer. Correct. In fact, if you've watched Ocean's 11, he is eating in every scene, or at least almost every scene. And he does so on purpose because he says that it helps him to be more relatable to people. Because there's something about eating together that actually does help us relate more as human beings. It's a kind of normal, natural part of life. And it's why politicians often don't like eating on camera, because it can look really awkward and silly, and they sort of feel like it damages their image or something like that. But Brad Pitt intentionally cuts through that by eating often in his scenes. Well, when it comes to eating, this is a bad comparison, so forgive me this. When it comes to eating, Jesus is like Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. Okay, just when it comes to eating, in Luke's Gospel, there are apparently, I haven't counted them, but there are apparently over 50 references to food in the Gospel, and Jesus is depicted as eating with people over and over and over again. And here's just a few examples. With the tax collectors and sinners at Levi's house, the meal at Simon the Pharisee's home, during which he's anointed with the oil on his feet and the hair, if you know that story. He makes a meal for 5,000 from somewhere, something. Loaves and fishes, I think that's supposed to say. At Mary and Martha's house, he condemns the Pharisees at a meal for their hypocrisy. He urges the Pharisees and the other elites to invite the poor to their meals, and that was a really countercultural thing to do in those days. He invites himself to dine with Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Again, very countercultural thing for a rabbi to do. And of course, the Last Supper, a key turning point in the story in the Gospel of Luke. He eats with the disciples in Emmaus after the resurrection. He's eating fish with the disciples in Jerusalem after. On and on it goes. In fact, one Bible scholar, Robert Karras, says this. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, at a meal, or coming from a meal. References to food abound on almost every single page of the Gospel. Well, in some ways that kind of makes sense, because eating is such a part of our lives, our everyday lives. But there's a bit more to it than that. It's a point in our everyday lives where we can connect with others if we're intentional about it. And if we had more time, we could look at how scholars have also identified eating with other people as a key part of Jesus' mission and method. But we'll look at that another day. Why? What happens when you eat with someone? Well, when you eat with someone again, like listening, you affirm their value. You say, I'm spending time with you over this meal. I mean, we can do it out of bad motives and we can do it reluctantly and all of that. But when we do it authentically and genuinely, we impart a sense of value to the other person and their time. But it also gives that opportunity to slow down and create space to do what we talked about earlier, to listen and to learn. It's a great environment for listening. Again, many of us fall into the trap of talking more than we listen. But eating together is a time when we can be more intentional about listening. And in doing so, we foster relationship, we share a moment of our life together. We actually give people the gift of a moment of our life, and we receive their gift of giving us a moment of theirs as well. You not only meet their physical needs, but also help meet our human needs through interaction. We create a natural setting for conversation and hearing each other's stories. We extend something of God's own hospitality to others. It's a way of embodying God's own goodness and generosity and hospitality when we invite others into our own meal times and homes. And also we adopt one of Jesus' own practices for connecting and including and welcoming others, as well as breaking down social barriers. Because in the first century particularly, we won't spend too much time on this, but in the first century particularly, social customs dictated very clearly and strongly who you would eat with and who you wouldn't eat with. What you ate, where you ate, who you sat with at a meal. People only usually ate with others of the same class. And we're a bit more of a classless society in Australia, kind of. Well, certainly more so than in these days. But Jesus broke all of those social customs deliberately by choosing who to eat with across the social boundaries. He ate with tax collectors, sinners, and social outcasts, and we know that he is criticised. This is one of the biggest criticisms that's levelled against him by the Pharisees and others is, you eat with tax collectors and sinners. And that same author, I haven't got a quote for you, sorry, but that same author, Robert Karras, who we saw earlier, said, in Luke's gospel, Jesus dies because of the way he eats. Or more to the point, because of who he chose to eat with. It was one of the things that they counted against him. Now, it might be pushing the envelope a little bit far to say that's why he died. But it makes the point, right? And one scholar says, Jesus' selection of table companions is no mere lapse of regard for the social customs of the day, but a strategy. Although likes should eat with likes, by eating with sinners and foreigners, Jesus formally signals that God extends an inclusive invitation to everyone, including to the outsiders, to receive the status as forgiven persons. A little bit of scholarly language there, but you get the point right. In other words, Jesus is showcasing God's own grace and hospitality through whom he eats with. Hey, if you need to go and get your kids from creche or mini bees, please go ahead and do that. Follow the others who are heading out now. But we're getting close to the end. So if we bring those two things together, listening and eating, these two simple practices which follow Jesus' own example of listening to others and eating with them, here are some quick takeaways. Firstly, and these apply to me every bit as much as anyone else in this room, take time to be present with and attentive to others. In our time-poor world, giving people our undivided attention is a gift. It communicates value and care in a way that few other things can. Ask insightful questions that help identify needs. Thought-provoking questions, and we see Jesus employ this practice. They help us identify deeper needs and how we can better serve those needs and the people who have them. Extend hospitality beyond your regular tribe. Just as Jesus ate with tax collectors and others who were looked down upon by the elites and his peers, we follow his example when we intentionally share meals and open our homes to people outside of our social group. Fourthly, listen with empathy and discernment. Like Jesus, we can learn to listen so as to discern underlying emotions, allowing us to respond with wisdom and compassion. And this often happens best over a meal. It helps us, as we've seen, contextualize our message, but we can also create a safe and unhurried atmosphere for relationships to grow. And finally, all of this can help point to Christ through our actions as well as our words. While listening builds credibility, it also does often open the opportunity to share about our own story and why Jesus matters so much to us. I just kind of want to name check Richard and Catherine Davis today, because they were telling me after Easter about some neighbours, and they didn't know we were going to do this series. They didn't know the acrostic, but they were living it, as I'm sure many of you do and are. But they had someone come to our Easter service, neighbours, that they've been building relationship in this very way for years. Eating together, having some drinks together, casual drinks, just listening to the story and the heart and the journeys of their neighbours. And at Easter, they came with them here to New Vine, to church. And it kind of sounds so natural and easy, doesn't it? Well, it's simple, it's not always easy, because we have to give up something to do this well. We have to give up our right to talk. We have to give up time, open our homes and our lives to others. But by prayerfully following Jesus' model of attentive, discerning, empathetic listening in the context of shared meals and hospitality, we can build relational bridges to help us effectively witness to the truth of the gospel. And I'm going to skip forward now just to wrap up by saying, in summary, we bless our neighbours, our communities and our world when we begin with prayer, when we listen, and what better way to slow down and listen than to take time to eat together and extend the very hospitality of the kingdom of God to those around us. Hey, if the music team would like to come on up, we're going to close with a song. A reminder that our AGM, we want to kick that off about 11:30. So thanks for bearing with us on that. If you can't stick around, you're a formal member, we still do have some proxy forms out in the foyer under the TV against this wall just outside the door there. It's not too late to fill one of those out, and we'd appreciate you doing that. That helps us get a quorum, but also helps you to register your right to affirm our lead team in particular. Next week, Joel is going to be with us again to share about the 2 S's in our Bless acrostic. Serve and share your story. And next week, I think we've got a small gift for you as well. Is that right? Is that? Yeah. So let me just leave you with these challenges. And as they say, when you point the finger, there's always 3 pointing back at you. So this is for me as well. Who will you begin to pray for today? And then pray for again tomorrow and the next day. How can you find ways and be intentional about listening and learning and getting to know them? And when can you invite them over for a meal? And be like the Son of Man himself, who came eating and drinking. Amen.